And we are live for this very, very special interview. Welcome back to Dr. J Radio Live, everyone. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, burning up in today's sun in Southern California, specifically Los Angeles. Today's a very special interview. As you know, I've been working for over 2 years to get this. We got close about 2 years ago, but hey, today we finally made it happen. As you know, I normally don't announce my guests because of things that may happen. That's why many of you found out about this just moments ago. So, let me introduce the one and only Department of Defense official, also Pentagon, works for Pentagon and also a veteran of, I'll let him tell me which military branch, the one and only Mr. Lou Elizondo. Mr. Elizondo, welcome to the show.
Well, Dr. J, thank you very much for having me, and a big thank you to your audience for putting up with me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And let me thank you for your service to this country. What branch did you serve in?
Well, you know, I often joke with my other service colleagues and tell people I wasn't smart enough for the Navy or the Air Force. I had a lower ASVAB score, so I was stuck going into the Army.
Gotcha. Well, hey, you know, again, like I said, I have a brother who's a veteran and a father who's a vet. So my hats off to you, my friend. Now, let's talk about AATIP. First of all, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. What's AATIP?
So AATIP was a precursor program. It was a program that initially stood up in, I believe, probably late 2007 and in 2008. It was a much broader portfolio, included a lot of things that now people know, the Skinwalker Ranch, et cetera. Most of my time really, though, was dedicated to the AATIP program. That was the piece of the program that really dealt with the topic of UAPs and incursions into controlled U.S. airspace.
Now, let me ask you this. Did you only investigate military sightings, or did you look at the history, say, of Project Blue Book, for example?
Yeah, great question. And I do get asked sometimes, you know, why didn't we look at other stuff? So in order to understand what, in essence, AATIP was, we were a Title X program, meaning it was using Department of Defense money to focus on national security issues. Now, what are Title X? Well, back in, I'm not going to give you a whole history lesson here, but it's important to note that after World War II, there was something called the National Security Act of 1947. And that really established the Department of Defense. At the time, it was called the War Office. Mm-hmm. And it basically said that there's going to be very specific limitations to what the Department of Defense can do, and it can only deal with national security. And then there was something called later on the CIA Act in the 1950s that established a civilian intelligence organization. And basically it started to confine, because of issues such as posse comitatus, you relegate military forces for military conflict. They can't be used necessarily domestically, and I think these are good reasons, right? You don't want the military, you don't want a military state, and that also establishes a senior civilian to run the entire Department of Defense, not a military officer and whatnot. And so, in essence, if you will, the rules of the road for the Department of Defense was very narrowly focused to those that are involved military equity. So for that reason, we couldn't talk to civilians. We couldn't talk to U.S. persons other than military contractors and military personnel. And that was because of the Title X authorities that this program was operating under.
So classification, essentially, right? Clearance.
You know, it's to protect U.S. persons' information. It's, you know, the government in the past hasn't always done a perfect job of protecting individual rights and civil liberties. Mm-hmm. Let's just say that. And so Congress passed laws over the years to restrict the military being used, for example, for domestic law enforcement. You can't do that. You can't use the U.S. military for certain domestic policies, to enforce domestic policies. That's illegal. And so if you want to investigate, for example, civilian type occurrences, you would need 3 organizations today's day and age. It's the FAA and Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigations. DOD really doesn't involve itself outside of military channels, and for good reason. So AATIP, again, to answer a long-winded answer, we really focused only on military equities while in AATIP. We used the intelligence community and the Department of Defense and we did our job within those. I guess you might say we colored within the lines that we were given.
So was it 145 cases that you looked at that was described in the June 25th report?
No, those 144 cases occurred from November 2019 until the present day. So those are very, very recent cases. And let me, if I can, just expand on that for a minute. People ask me, what did you think, Lou, about this report that came out, the unclassified report? And first thing I would say, Dr. J, is first and foremost, the very first sentence of the very first paragraph, it says this is a preliminary report. That means other reports are coming. So that's great. We've already crossed the bridge on that. More reports are going to be forthcoming. But furthermore, it says in there, when you read about the third page into this, that there were 144 cases and only one were they able to figure out what it was. And most of these cases occurred after November 2019 until present day, and only involved the Navy. So if you look at it, you're talking about 143 incidents that remain complete mystery to the U.S. government, and that occurred in just the last year and a half and only involved the Navy. We're not talking about the Air Force. We're not talking about the Army or the Coast Guard or the Marine Corps. That's a lot of cases. And furthermore, when you read into the document, you as a former attorney, you probably know this, devil's in the details. Words mean something. And when you get towards the last page, you see in there a disclaimer saying a lot more of reports would have been reported had it not been for this overarching stigma and taboo that plagues this topic. That's super important, because if you do the simple math, and let's just say 10% of these reports were actually reported, these incidents were reported, that then means there was over 1,400 incidents in the last year and a half alone, only involving the Navy. Now, you tell me if that's not significant.
Oh, it's massive, especially if you count U.S. Air Force, Space Force, and what about civilians? And what about international? That's
absolutely
main factor.
Dr. J, you're absolutely right. So we haven't even begun to scratch the surface with the civilians. FAA has already said they don't really take reports on this type of stuff, only from an air safety issue. And of course, we haven't really even begun to talk about the international incidents. So I think this is just truly the tip of the iceberg. Where science says, 90% of the iceberg remains underwater and 10% above it, and you can see it. I think we're probably like at 2%. This is just scratching the surface.
Now, I want to ask what essentially happened to you. I'm not going to ask you about if you believe Bob Lazar's story, but I want to ask you, are you aware of Bob Lazar, who he is?
I am. I'm aware of Mr. Lazar and his story. I've never met the gentleman. I couldn't tell you one way or the other. Golden rule I have, if I haven't had a chance to meet you, I usually keep my mouth shut. Just because I simply don't know. And I think this community is full of people with opinions, and we don't always necessarily know, but we believe or we think. And so because of that, I think I'm just going to keep my comments to myself, because I simply don't know.
The only thing I wanted to say was your case reminds me of what happened to him when he came out. It seems to me that in the last couple months, they kind of railroaded you, as opposed to, trying to make it look like, oh, this is explainable or things like that, as opposed to taking this as the actual threat it is. And that's another term that we could actually talk about, but taking it as seriously as it is. This is a massive factor that is global and goes back possible millennia. You see, cave art that shows this. You see, other artwork or icons of Jesus and UFO in the background. So it's just mind-boggling. There was an interesting question here from somebody in the chat. It's about the Tic Tac. Is it possible that the Tic Tac and many others are actually frozen hydrates that are surrounded as a dense air bubble and are traveling along the magnetic lines of the Earth? Seems obvious to me.
Well, okay, interesting theory, but magnetic lines of the Earth travel in straight lines. What we're seeing with the Tic Tacs and other vehicles is this erratic movement, and it seems to be in response to us. So there's some sort of intelligence, if you will, that is controlling these things and will actually react to us. When you listen to Dave Fravor and the
Yep.
accounts of his wingman, now we know her as Alex Dietrich,
Alex, yes.
right? The object in essence basically reacted to the presence of Dave Fravor as he's coming down, and it began to mirror his position. Those aren't magnetic lines of the Earth. That's something else.
Now let's talk about the fact that this is a transmedium craft. We got space, air, and water. And I've heard an interesting theory which kind of fits. If this is actually entrapped by what I believe you know as Alcubierre warp bubble, right? If that's the case, then water never touches the craft. Is essentially enveloped in a gravity field. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, I'm not a professional physicist. That's what has been explained to me by government professional physicists. That once the transmedium travel, really, once you have that ability to warp space time in a localized area, all sorts of unique things are now possible.
Gotcha.
That in our current environment, our current paradigm, we simply can't do. So things such as friction coefficients go way down, and it precisely as you're saying, it's possible now to operate through various different domains or environments without the consequences that we have to deal with.
Have you ever seen any submarine footage that actually had a craft going past the submarine at amazing speeds that we can't recreate underwater?
Yeah, so submarine footage is a little bit more difficult than what you might think. Like, for example, what we might get from gun camera footage on an airplane, because water density, once you get past really about 90 feet underwater, light starts to really dwindle away. And once you get to about 200 feet, it's almost pitch black to the naked eye. And of course, military submarines, I can't go into detail here, but travel considerably deeper than that. So to quote unquote see a UAP underwater, in order to do that, we use acoustics. We use sonar. So in the atmosphere, we use radar, and underwater we use sonar. And sonar, as we know, travels at the speed of sound underwater, which is a very dense medium, and you can get some fairly accurate readings. There is, without, again, I have to be careful what I say here. There is some reporting that exists that suggests that some military underwater equities are also picking these things up underwater with remarkable performance characteristics, by the way.
Yeah, again, and that would being so dense, the water, I would think that's just not possible unless, of course, we explore the theory that maybe it's not touching the water. Anyhow, we got a question here. Blake and Brent Cousins, they're Third Phase of Moon, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel, and they ask, can you ask Lou, why don't we see the entire Tic Tac gimbal video from the beginning to the end? Has Lou seen the entire video?
Sure. So those videos were released because the contents of which that are now publicly available are not classified. Any information that a video picks up may have classified information. It may have sensitive information like specific call signs. It may have locational data where we are, and we don't necessarily want to broadcast that. So what you see in those videos, Go Fast Gimbal and FLIR, are portions of a video that were deemed to be unclassified and fit for public consumption. The reason why you don't see the rest of those videos, in some cases they don't exist, in other cases they do exist, is because the government has decided that that information is sensitive, and it reveals potentially sources and methods. I can tell you there's many other videos. I think the problem is that people concentrate a lot on the FLIR and those 3 videos that came out back in 2017 and 18, not realizing that was low-hanging fruit. Those were the least compelling of the videos. They were compelling and are compelling, but there's others that really would blow your socks off.
That's what I honestly expected, was that we were getting just the crumbs, and you actually got to see different angles, different videos, right? 4K, 8K, things like that.
I did. I was privy to many other videos and photographs and reporting. But it's important. I always caution people. Videos can only tell you part of the story. It's important that people recognize that what a video doesn't do, it doesn't tell you what happened before the incident, and it doesn't tell you what happened after the incident, and it doesn't tell you what's happening from other perspectives and angles. And that's why you need other video. right? So who's to say that there's not other FLIR video out there, right? From another platform, and radar signature, maybe from an E2 Hawkeye and the Princeton and some other, radar sensor units out there. So again, I want to be careful because I don't want to speak on behalf of the government right now. It's really not my place to do so. But I think people can rest assured that there's far more compelling information out there, and that's what Congress was briefed on, and that's why you have now this government taking this topic very, very seriously.
And that's what I'm really hoping for, is the day that we finally get to see this stuff. And as others of my friends have said, when do we get to go to a museum and see things like the Roswell wreckage? If it is what it is, if that's a whole nother story. There's a question here from another friend. Dark Hour Paranormal reads, what is the biggest risk in revealing high technology that may exist while keeping the mechanics under wraps?
What is the biggest risk? And in revealing, well, I don't think there's a risk revealing the fact that there are these advanced capabilities, and I think we've done that, and I think we're doing that. Again, what we do need to pay attention to is the protection of our sources and methods and our collection activities. And that's only because not because we don't trust the American people, it's because we don't trust our adversaries. We don't want to tip our hand, because if we're using these capabilities against our adversaries, we don't necessarily want to let them know, because we spend a lot of money trying to develop these things, right? And we don't want them to develop countermeasures. So that's the normal world of intelligence and that type of related work. So again, it's not that we don't trust the American people. There's just no way to have that conversation with 500 million people and keep it from our enemies. But I do think you're starting to see look, we have conversations all the time that there are rogue nations that have, nuclear technology.
Yeah.
Maybe the specifics of the technology is classified, but the fact that that country has nuclear technology isn't so much a secret. The same thing with this, the fact that there are things flying around in our controlled airspace that we don't know what the heck they are. We don't know how they work, and we frankly don't have a clue from where they're from or what the intent is. That's not a secret, and it shouldn't be a secret. I don't think physics and the mathematics should be a secret. What I think should remain a secret is our critical technology. I will tell you this right now, that if I had to choose between disclosure and full disclosure and sacrificing our national security, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't sacrifice our national security for that. Now, is there a way to have a conversation where we can still have disclosure and protect national security? Well, that's precisely what my colleagues and I are trying to do. We're trying to thread that needle very carefully. None of us want to compromise national secrets. None of us want to hurt this country. But what we do want to do is get that information that's not classified, that information that does squarely belong to the people of the United States and potentially the world, but certainly your taxpayer dollars were paid to find answers, and now we have some answers. You deserve those answers.
There's a follow-up question from Blake and Brent Cousins of Third Phase of the Moon, the world's largest UFO YouTube channel. How far advanced do you think private corporations have in technology? Do you think Lockheed Martin may have developed a Tic Tac? Has Lou asked Lockheed what assets they have in their possession?
Wow. That's a really good question. Let me answer this this way. Have we asked? Yes. I'm not going to tell you what the answer is because part of that answer requires approval from certain organizations and military contractors, and I'm not at liberty to answer on their behalf. I've made it very clear what I said, and I went right up to that line by saying, when I was asked, do I think that the U.S. government is in possession of this exotic material? And I said, yes. And I stand by that. But at this point, I really can't elaborate much more beyond that, only because this is still unfolding. And what we don't want to do is, the truth be told, the last thing we want to do is to scare the gopher to go back into its hole. It's just now poking its head out of the hole, and we're trying to coax it, saying it's okay to come out. It's okay to have this conversation. So, what I don't want to do is preemptively say something that all of a sudden forces the gopher to go back underground for the next 70 years.
Now, Michio Kaku thinks these are possibly extraterrestrial drones. Do you think that there's possibly a pilot inside? Has any attempt been made to contact these craft? Or is that classified still?
I just don't know if I'm qualified to answer that.
Gotcha.
Boy, look, Dr. Michio Kaku might be absolutely correct. And by the way, let me say for the record, I really applaud his position and his willingness to at least have the conversation.
Yeah.
Science
He
is
wouldn't
always
years ago. He
yeah,
wouldn't
no.
years ago.
Well,
Yeah.
most wouldn't. And
Yeah.
and science, the true spirit of science is questioning the mysteries of our universe, right? And questioning the preconceived notions and ideas that we have. So I just want to take just a moment to publicly provide my appreciation to Michio Kaku and a few others like Avi Loeb, who are willing to have the conversation. That's a big deal, and I think we need to encourage that type of dialogue between scientists and our academic communities. Now, are they possible that these are probes? Sure, absolutely it is.
Yeah.
But is there also indication that these things may have something or someone inside? Possibly, yeah. Is there anecdotal evidence to suggest that? Well, there's. Well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, fair enough. You said more than I expected, honestly. Now, I believe the last episode you did of the History Channel, forgive me for the title that I don't recall, someone asked you about a sighting that you potentially had and you couldn't answer. Is that because of security, national security, or is it just don't want to go there at all yet?
It's multifaceted. I look. I've said this for the record, and I'll say it again. And I know some people don't like when I say this, but my opinion doesn't matter. What matters are the facts and what the data says. I'm always very careful to interject my observations because at the end of the day, it's subjective. There's no way to prove it. There's no way to quantify it or qualify it. So what matters to me is what I can see and pick up and record on military sensors and the eyewitnesses of trained observers and pilots and whatnot and radar data. That to me is better because then I can actually provide information such as telemetry and velocity and altitude and things like that. Just telling you my own personal experience, that's like asking anybody on a Friday night at a local bar, who's your favorite football team? I mean, you're going to get a different answer from everybody, right?
Yeah.
And they all think they're right. So
yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I'm not sure that my personal observations really matter. They're just that, they're personal, and I don't want it to skew our ability to collect data. I don't want people to come up, well, Lou said this, and therefore it must be. There's this community, this UFO community is full of people like that already that are make a pretty good amount of money telling people what their opinions are, and I don't want to be one of those guys. I'd rather just provide you the facts and the data, and then
let us make the opinion.
Allow you, the jury, to make that decision. I've always said that you as a lawyer, you can appreciate this, but my job as an investigator is very simple: collect the truth, speak the truth. And my job is to collect the evidence, preserve the evidence, and then provide it to a jury. And in this case, you're the jury. Your audience is a jury. My job is just to provide you the data, and then you make the decision. It doesn't matter what I feel or what I think about something. What matters is what the data suggests and what it means to you.
I got the final question from Third Phase of Moon. How far advanced do you think the U.S. government or private corporation are in advanced tech that the public is not aware of? The B-1 bomber was classified for 40 years until the public was aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of advanced tech. I'm not going to go into it right now. That's certainly not my place to do that. But the U.S. government and other countries are always trying to maintain a competitive advantage over their adversaries, and we should. I think that's money well spent. We have a tremendous amount of advanced technology in this country. Now, if you're asking the question of if that was a derivative of some sort of UAP, the answer to that would be, unfortunately, it's pretty. That type of vehicle would be very, very advanced, and it should be no surprise that if let me give you an example. It's a bit like imagine an aircraft, a 747 that crashes in the Amazon, and everybody escapes. They jump out of the plane with parachutes, and everybody's fine. But the plane crashes, and a indigenous group of people from the Amazon who've never seen human beings outside of their own little little, if you will, village, come across bits and pieces of this aircraft. And they find glass from the cockpit, and they pick it up, and they realize the glass can be used to skin the meat from their kill much easier, right? So they reverse engineer the glass, and they're using it now as a tool to cut skin away from the meat, right? That's not the intended purpose of the glass, right? And there's no way they're going to recognize that, how to rebuild a 747 in the middle of the Amazon. But it doesn't mean that there isn't bits and pieces that can be picked up and certain things gleaned from that. I'm not saying that's necessarily the case. I'm not going to speak on behalf of our government what it has or has not done. But that's probably a better analogy when answering that question. Do we have the skill sets needed to even study and investigate something like that? Well, we're now beginning to realize that the physics probably lies within the realm of quantum physics. Mm-hmm. We still don't understand it very well. So there's probably a lot more we need to learn before we could figure out how to reverse engineer something like that.
The example you said with Amazon, I'm going to steal the example that Bob Lazar said. Take this iPhone, drop it in the wagon trail days. They can have an unlimited budget. They wouldn't come close to even figuring out what it is, let alone powering it up.
Right.
Impossible. Now,
well, you need an entire infrastructure, right? You need an ability to charge the phone, right? You need an ability to do a lot of things with that phone. You need cellular service for the phone to work, and you need GPS if you want to use a GPS. And there's these multi-billion-dollar industries set up for every single one of the capabilities on your smartphone. And unless you have all of those in place, chances are you're not really going to be able to utilize it very well.
Now, what are you currently doing? Because you no longer work with TTSA, right?
I am no longer affiliated with To the Stars Academy. That is correct.
So what can you talk about what you're doing with your colleagues to further the truth to get to where we want to get to, which is seeing the facts?
Yeah, well, I think that will probably come apparent here at some point in the future, but we are working very hard, very diligently behind the scenes. We are engaging our friends and colleagues, both in the legislative side and the executive side of our government. We're also engaging the media and foreign countries to stimulate the conversation and facilitate that conversation between our country and theirs. We're doing a lot of things to help us pursue this initiative. There's 5 pillars of emphasis. I'll restate them again of what
the 5 variables, doing. Right?
No, not observables. No.
Okay.
There's also happens to be 5 areas of think of this as a military or an intelligence campaign. What we are doing is very deliberate. It's very, very methodical, and has to be synchronized. So, and very well coordinated. So in essence, the first pillar of emphasis is legislative engagement, which is where Chris Mellon comes into play, making sure that our elected officials know this is a good conversation and it's okay to have this conversation. And then the second pillar of emphasis is executive level engagement in our executive branch. So department heads and secretary level, letting them know that this is a national security issue and they should pay attention to it, right? And to hell with stigma and taboo, because this topic isn't going away. The third area of emphasis is foreign government engagement, engaging our friends and allies, putting them in contact with the right people here in Washington, D.C. for them to get more information and perhaps start sharing information that they may have on this topic with us and vice versa. The fourth area of engagement is media engagement, and that is engaging mainstream media so they know it's okay to have the conversation as well. 3 years ago, nobody in their right mind would have touched this conversation.
It's been very tough for me for 9, believe me. And 3, ever since December 2017, all of a sudden things came easier.
Right. And so the fifth area of emphasis, which is probably the most important, last but certainly not least, is public engagement. Exactly what we're doing right now, because ultimately, if the public says it's okay to have this conversation, then Congress is going to follow. They're going to do whatever the constituents tell them what to do. Our government's going to find it easier to spend money on it, and the media is going to report on it. So and what you don't want to do is give one side more information than the other. You don't want to get too far ahead of the headlights. You want to keep everybody synchronized and moving together forward. And so this is what what we've been doing and the work that you're doing, Dr. J, and your audience. We're only having this conversation today because you have allowed it, and your audience wants to hear it. And your audience, is no longer having this conversation, if you will, in the dark corners of some video game arcade place, but they're having it now at the water cooler. They're having it at the dinner table. They're talking to their friends and colleagues and family members, saying, "Hey, did you see that news report? And what do you think about it? And what do you think?" That's happening, and that's the only reason why guys like Chris and I can do what we're doing, because folks like you are doing what you're doing, and you're pursuing this topic very, very seriously.
Absolutely. And I have been. It's been an interest all my life. I've been labeled the black sheep among family, even though they've seen things that they don't understand. It was a mass sighting. The entire country of Greece saw what we saw in 1990. Yet I was the only one that continued to read, watch, and then start interviewing everybody on this topic. I know you have to go at 30 minutes. There are a lot of people that have questions. But what I'll do is next time, if you could come on, we could stay longer. We could get to other people's questions. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely, Dr. J. You got it. My sincere pleasure.
Thank you so much. Now, before you go, I'm going to give you two things real quick. If you, hypothetically, if you were commander in chief, what would you do? And second, if you have a final message for everybody, what would you say?
Sure. Well, if I was commander in chief for a day, I would be doing a lot of things differently. And first and foremost, I would be I'd approach this from a whole of government approach. I would ask the National Science Foundation to come in. I'd have government grants to some of our best academic institutions. I would create a mini Manhattan Project, but for the purposes of good and something peaceful. I would ask our friends and allies to come in under the tent as well, and it'd have a big conversation with the American people. That's what I would do, amongst many other things that I would that would break down some of the dysfunction right now in Washington, D.C. I would there's quite a bit I would do. And then as far as my recommendations to your audience is, please think for yourself. This is I'm going to tell you this because there's some danger to this. There's a lot of hucksters and fraudsters in this community, and it's what has kept this conversation from being held at the high levels of government that you're seeing now, because there are people that want to protect their little fiefdoms. They've created a fairly successful cottage industry from misleading people and selling a false narrative. And if it was up to them, they would keep you in the dark. They would continue to have you follow that their narrative and not the truth. So please be careful. Listen to everybody, but think for yourself. Don't let anybody think for you, including me. If you ever hear me tell you you need to do this or that, then it's probably time that I need to get my butt off the stage. Because ultimately, you have to think for yourself, and you have to be able to ask the hard questions, and don't expect somebody to just give you those answers. Because we don't necessarily have all the answers, and anybody who says that they do, they're probably deceiving you and deceiving themselves.
Well said. Thank you for your service, and please hang by for a quick moment.
You got it.